Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever in the world you might be. I am Nicole BZ, and you know everything. I've wanted to thank you because I have a feeling you are incredibly busy, and so I'm just so grateful that you made this time. So let's just start there with the gratitude. How's your Monday going?
So good. So good. And also like a different Monday than usual. I'm leaving tomorrow for a keynote. So I'm flying out tomorrow. So it's just like packing and random things like that I'm taking care of before I take off, and excitement. Like I get really excited before speaking every single time. It's wild. I do it all the time, and it's still not all the time, but like enough where I'm still really excited every time.
Okay. Well, I will use this then as the segue to the introduction because I had your website up in front of me ready to go. And Jennifer Germaine, again, I am so excited. We only recently met. A lot of the people on this podcast and in the relatables interview portion of it are people that I've known for a long time, people that I've personally worked with, sometimes people who have worked with me. But you and I just recently crossed paths at a workshop that you were hosting to help people really step into their own story and storytelling abilities in terms of public speaking. So it's no surprise that you're doing a keynote. I know that you teach a lot in terms of how to help people step into their power on stage. You spent more than 15 years as a corporate lawyer. I call people corporate refugees sometimes that I get to work with, but I think a corporate lawyer is a whole new level of like torture that someone can put on their resume. You scaled your own law firm to a national level, and you gave it all up to help empower entrepreneurs and leaders to get to the root of who they are, cultivate their own internal skills to communicate and lead with authenticity and empathy. And I know that when we worked with each other, or when I had the pleasure of participating in one of your workshops, that you were clearly multi-passionate. You had a lot of things going on, keynote speaking being one of them, coaching being another. You have your own business. You're doing so much and leading in so many different communities. I'm going to let you speak now, but I would love to just begin with, for our listeners today, your origin story, how the hell you walked away from a career, from your own business, how you discovered that this was going to be, as I like to call it, your next big thing, and how you found yourself standing on stages as the keynote speaker.
Such a good question. That's so many different paths.
Yeah, I have a really bad habit of asking 18-part questions, so let's just get that out the door as well. Feel free to tune into any one of them or ignore me entirely.
Just pretend you're not there.
Or just whichever thing you decide you want to talk about or answer. I say follow that white rabbit.
Oh, it's so follow that white rabbit. I love that. It's such a, actually like this space of the question, to tell you the truth, because all of our stories are so complex on how we got where we were. And I was a corporate attorney for years, started my career. I was an accountant, then a lawyer. It just felt like I was good at school. I thought I was going to be a doctor, was like, no way. I'm not staying in school that long. And then I was an accountant, was really great at that, thought I was going to go work for the top 4 accounting firms. And I was like, what am I doing? I don't know if I want to work with numbers the rest of my life. And I found myself in law school. So then I was like, it's interesting to know that the reason I didn't become a doctor was because of school, and I'm just going to school about the same amount
I wasn't going to say
Not
it, but
technically, but yeah, exactly. Because it's like all this, like, and everyone's just like, you're so good. I was so intrigued by mergers and acquisitions. And so they said, if you don't do it now, you won't go back and do it again. So I was like, all right, I'll go. I went to law school, and I felt like a fish out of water from day one, where everyone had watched Law and Order. They were obsessed with it. I was like, I've never even watched that show. That couldn't even be, it's not in my purview. I just felt very different from everyone. Even when I got out, same thing. But I was very good at what I did. And I, like a lot of people I would walk into rooms and they felt so stuffy for me, and they felt so black suit, gray suit, navy blue. Like, that's just what it felt like. And I just felt like I was always a burst of color.
I was going to say,
like
for our listeners only, not our viewers, we've a like almost hot pink blazer going on. So yeah, the navy blue, black was not going to cut it.
No, and it was just this feeling of stifled, like this stifledness that came with that career that I never felt like I fit into. But it was also all I knew. And so the next thing, I was working for several different law firms. I found myself thinking, I feel I could hold a container for people, like clients and team, better than lawyers do. It's a high stress profession. And people are mostly coming to you with their fears and their problems all the time. So it creates high stress for your team as well as your clients. And you have to deal with just fear zones all the time. So I set out to do that. I had my firm for probably the first 8 months, and I had not moved the needle on that at all. And I found myself being like, the whole reason I opened my firm was to do law differently. And I haven't done anything there. And I was super frustrated. And it was like my first real big introduction into habitual structures. It's like, if you don't know how to do it in anything, or if you've been conditioned to do things for 8 years at this time, it's really tough to all of a sudden see the way out. I ended up hiring a coach at the time that helped me a ton to do that. And one of the areas that I did it the most, Nicole, was in speaking. And this was an odd thing for me, is I was doing all the marketing that lawyers do, which is a lot. They'll do networking functions, dinners, luncheons, tables at events, seminars, speaking, blah. It's like all over the place. And I was feeling really burnt out trying to do that in my law firm to get new clients. And I was speaking to my coach. She's like, what if you just went in on one? What would it be? And there was this little itty bitty secret inside of me that I'd went to this conference in my industry year after year after year. And I kept thinking I could be on that stage. I know just as much as the lawyer speaking up there. But that didn't make any sense because I was a very shy child and I had extreme anxiety public speaking or getting called on in class. Like I would have so much anxiety felt in my body that my voice would shake, even through law school. It felt as if my voice was shaking when I was getting called on. So that didn't make sense. And she's like, that's probably exactly where you should go, because that has year after year, you're getting the same message, the same as I did in my law firm. Is it's always for me is you can do better than that. I wish it wasn't. That sounds so egotistical, but it is. It is like how I know, like, oh, I should turn into this. So I turned into it. And the second reason I turned into it is I thought the lawyers that were speaking were not speaking to the level of the clientele. They were speaking to other lawyers in the room, which there was barely any. And to put it nicely, they were really boring. They were just too complex to listen to, where they were giving like super nuanced little itty bits of case law instead of thinking of like, how could I help these people actually navigate their worlds better? So I decided to do it in a different way. And I ended up getting called back year after year after year. Then they asked me to do more speaking with this conference. Then I was emceeing it. And this was an industry that was at that time, like 95% men. I was one of the only women in the room. And I was about 20 years younger than any of the other speakers. But it evolved, and that's how I ended up picking up speaking. So I eventually ended up letting go of my law firm. Loved it, but I loved what I was doing, allowing people to be much more creative. So that's kind of a little bit, that's a taste of the journey. Any intrigue? I saw you like doing notes of what's fascinating or what's even coming up for you, Nicole, hearing that so far.
So Jen, we had some audio issues there. I like to be fully transparent. So we're going to get this train rolling again. Thank you for your patience with me. I appreciate that. You have invested time, you've invested energy, you've invested money into several disciplines. And at, I would imagine, probably pretty crucial points, you went, you know what? I think there's something else out there for me. And I am going to take that leap of faith and see what happens. I think a lot of our listeners can relate to that experience, but perhaps you're standing on the precipice of that leap. How did you know it was the time to jump? How did it feel soaring? I always say I can't tell if I'm falling or flying. How did that transition work for you? And yeah, share a little bit about that part of your journey with our listeners, please.
Yes. I'm actually going to tell two different stories here because I've done it in two different ways. The first time is when I launched my own law firm. I feel at that point I had just become so frustrated with the law firm models that I was working for and realizing it wasn't going to change. And I had worked for 3 different law firms at that time, a really big one, kind of a middle, and then also a small one. And none of them were really hitting what I thought was true success on how we can carry humans in law. So I started my own, but that one felt like I was almost like drugged through the fear model of like, it's not really working out. I'm not sure if this is going to work out for me. I put so much in place. I was scared to death the entire time. I lost about 10 pounds and I'm a small person. So it was very unhealthy for me to do that. And I remember, man, it was wild, but I remember going out and I had hives. I got hives like when I was going through the transition, because you have to go through all these different processes to get out of one law firm, and like all your clients send a letter and then they have to write back to you who they decide to go with, like if they're going with me or staying. And the law firm I was working for became very vicious and not kind to myself and the staff that was leaving with me. So that was one model. I did it in a way where I was scared the entire time. And then the second piece is when I decided to sell my law firm. That was a very different feeling and it was stressful in its own way. But that one was about 2 years into owning my own law firm. I went to a retreat for 10 days. And I remember thinking to myself, I've never, ever desired to be a lawyer. And I was like, I would like to stop being a lawyer. And I had already moved myself into a CEO role where I wasn't doing a lot of the day-to-day law, but that still was, and I had a separate company doing the coaching and business strategies. But it felt like I was pulled down when I went back into the law firm, and I was feeling really high and good when I was in the second company. So it came to the point where I was like, I would like to let the law firm go and I would like to sell it. So I went through this process trying to find a broker, trying to find other people, and it went slowly. Like first it took me probably 6 months to say out loud to another person that I would like to sell my law firm. I would like to get out of this. It started with saying, I don't want to be a lawyer. And then finally I was like, I don't see the way out, because I'd never heard of anyone selling a law firm. I didn't even know how to find a broker. And then when I would interview brokers, it'd be like, you're crazy. You're 38. Selling a law firm, this doesn't make sense. People sell law firms when they're getting ready to retire. So I had to keep searching, and I was in Iowa and I found a broker out of California that was used to somebody selling their business just to sell their business, because I was actually very profitable. For a law firm model, I was extremely profitable. So it was just like a completely different journey where I was getting called and I was like, I would like to choose my path forward instead of feeling like I just fell into the next steps when I started my law firm. And this time I was like, now I'd like to have choice. And I would like to empower myself to choose which direction I would like to go. So that felt a lot different, choosing that. And I had to go against a lot of pushback from industries and people thinking like, this doesn't make absolutely any sense. And I had to allow that little bit of faith in me and double down on that over and over again when the rest of the world kept showing to me it wasn't going to work out. That was a different story the second time.
Ooh, yeah. People will definitely be able to relate to that. I'm gonna dig in a little bit as well, because I heard you say the first time around you were really driven by fear.
Mm-hmm.
And then the second time around, it was this idea or belief in empowerment. And the challenge I see so often in people is that when we're in that fear space, it doesn't feel like we have a choice. And in the place where we're trying to explore choices, literally, am I going to do this or am I going to do something completely different? It can feel really counterintuitive.
Mm.
And I'm wondering, with 2020 hindsight, what you can reflect on in terms of how that fear impacted the next business that you started, and then how that faith and empowerment impacted the next business that you started.
Mm. So let me think about that, because fear is always present.
Mm-hmm.
It's a choice of which one is going to lead. And I have been worked even in the second business to not fully embracing my faith over fear at times and letting that lead. For me, it has always felt like it feels as if the world is trying to get me to do something different, or I'm naturally good at this, but my desire is leading me somewhere else. So I have to be strong enough to butt against the external world telling me no. And if I continue to do that long enough, their world will show me that I was right to go after my faith and desire. But I have to continue to do that over and over and over again. And for me, a lot of times my practice is I have to relax myself back into my vision and relax my body to get out of my mind all the time. I think I used to do it, once a day or once a week, where I'm feeling like I'm doing it multiple times a day, over and over and over and over again. Because for me, if I can relax my body, I can release my mind long enough to be like, oh, I'm in a fear cycle, because that's so intuitive to who I am and how I helped people for so many years. I have to be very conscious of that and remind myself my natural instinct, which is a benefit, is to help other people first over myself. And I lose myself by helping other people first, and I have to find that vision within me. So I have oscillated, even with the second business, of going back and forth of like, I'm going to push into a lot of helping people because I see so much in so many different ways I can help people. And I just had an experience at the very beginning of this month where I was like, you've lost yourself again, Jen. Come back. So it just feels like I'm doing that a lot. Is coming back to myself. Did that kind of answer your question?
That completely answered my question. And it's one of the questions I tend to ask people, at least the first time I speak with everybody. I don't know if to my listeners it feels random. It makes perfect sense why I interview the people that I interview. And the ways I've sort of threaded all together is I tend to ask a handful of the same questions because I think people's answers are prophetic and profound and impactful. And you just touched on something that I think is really important. What does your day-to-day routine look like?
So I get up in the mornings and I exercise first because I have to blow through my pressure. So I put a lot of, like, if I wake up first thing in the morning, all of a sudden my mind is going, and I like to exercise because I can tell right away. I feel a lot better after that. I get ready after that, and then I go into writing. And I'll spend probably the first hour of every day writing. I may do a visualization. I may do a meditation. It depends how I feel. At no point have I really looked at my phone throughout all of this. There is one article I read that gives a little bit of news updates. I rarely listen to podcasts before I do my own thing, but my writing is like the exploration of my inner world. I feel it's also the time for me to dump all of the things I think I should be doing, or the laundry lists. I keep very long lists of things in my head. And I've known this as a lawyer is I had a whole team, Nicole, and I would know everything that I had to do. They had to do, the 19 clients had to do. So I had to have them report to me to be like, I have to know that you've taken it off the list, because my mind is more of an extensive list than our task manager. I still feel that way, even without that large of a team. And it's constantly dumping that. And I do that through my writing. And then I also figure out like where I'm going with that. After that, I usually block off most of my mornings for projects, working on the business. And then the afternoons, I'll get into calls. And there'll be like a couple days a week that I'll do morning coffees and connections with people. But that's kind of what my schedule looks like. I also know, to be completely transparent, is around 5 o'clock, I'm going to have difficulties keeping my mindset high. So I get tired more in the afternoon, so around 3 o'clock on. If I don't have phone calls, I'll usually have to do something there to take care of myself and nurture myself, because around 5 or 6 and the transition back into life with my partner, I usually have to do some sort of a practice, which might be yoga, meditation, breath work, walking in nature, to come down or to make sure that I anticipate feeling my partner's energy and however he is. Because once I feel that, if he's stressed out or anything, which he hardly ever says, if I can feel it though from him, that'll cause my brain to just all of a sudden start telling me these stories that our fear-based story, because our sympathetic nervous system hijacks our daydreaming. And when I do that, so I try to put in practices at night too. Night's tough for me. That's the time when I have to really double down on my practices the most.
Thank you. The reason I wanted to ask that, firstly, our morning routines look very similar. But secondly, it sounds like, well, and I know because I got to work with you just a little bit, you're a multi-passionate person. You have a lot of different projects, and not just you're going to write about a topic or speak about a topic. You're doing very, very different things. I mean, tomorrow you're hopping on a plane and giving a keynote speech. And I find that sometimes routine, or this concept of discipline, I'm using air quotes again for the people just listening, not watching, can feel dissonant to those of us who are quite obviously multi-passionate and have a lot of different things going on. And so how do you juggle what you've structured out as to me what feels like a pretty repetitive day? And I mean that complimentary. But how does that repetition or that routine, or perhaps use a term more like ritual, how does that allow you to focus on all of the different things that you focus on and to be in so many different places, working on so many different things with so many different people?
Yeah. So I am a routine person. I do not take offense to that. So then I know that I have to find ways to get out of my routine to find creativity. So a thing that I love to do is I like to sit in different areas. So I'll go to coffee shops, and I rarely go to the same coffee shops. I have like a network of a lot of them that I go to. And I'll just pop in for a couple of hours to get connected to people, but not have to talk to people. So I'll do things like that. I go on little dates that I take myself on. I just went to Flourish Flower Farm here. It's beautiful in North Carolina by Asheville. It was like a peonies workshop. So I spent the whole morning doing peonies because I like experiences and I like seeing how others hold space for humans and what they do in it. And I've been doing that for years. So I do different things to get out of. I love watching speakers. That would be another one. I study how people speak. I study comedians. I just did a Pachakacha, which is a different speaking format. So I'm always trying to think of how can I expand myself sideways outside of my routines and take in information that I deeply enjoy to allow my creativity to flourish a lot more. So, well, in one hand, I am routined. In the other hand, I like explore a lot within that routine. Because my partner can sit here for a whole day. I could not do that. That would make me feel, I don't know, like, ooh, I want to do that.
I'm going to have to get a list of coffee shops when we're done with this. And you also jumped ahead to another question that I love to ask all of my people. What is your creative process? And this is totally just selfish asking, how do you find that creativity when you're not feeling like this is a creative moment or potentially a creative month? So creative process, and like, do you believe in the fact of that you can create that creativity, or are you more at the whim of the creative muse?
Yeah. That's a good question. I would like to be creative all the time. I don't know if that's possible. I can feel the difference, and it's between pushing my creativity, where I'm trying to force my creativity, and if I continue to do that, it'll slap me in the face. It won't work out. It never works. And that's tough because it's usually where I've got something. Let me tell you through the lens of speaking. So when I have speeches ready to go, or I'm getting ready to go into a keynote like I know that at some point during that process, I am going to first try to imitate somebody else. Like I'm going to do a lot of writing on this speech. I'm going to do a lot of speaking, and then I'm going to be speaking as if I'm somebody else at some point in the creative process. Then I'm going to get really mad at myself for doing that. And I'm going to be like, this isn't natural. I can't find my own voice. Where is this? I'm lost in it. And then the third iteration is like, I will find myself again in the voice. And then I continue speaking something out over and over and over again to be like, yeah, this isn't my flow. Find it again. So it's like this weaving in and out of it. But I know that whole process. And then there's some point where I'm going to get scared and think that I'm a fraud and I shouldn't be doing it. That'll come. So there's like waves that I'm accustomed to within myself where I know I just have to accept that piece of me and step away from the creation process. And sometimes it will be the day before a speech or 2 days before where I was like, this isn't coming together. I had slides that I told them I'd get them last Friday. Thursday, I had a whole day of completely freaking out and been like, this is total garbage. I don't have the slides. This is miserable. I can't talk like this. What is this? And then Friday, I put them all together and I sent them off. But it's like this journey that I go on every single speech I've ever written. It's like, this is bad. What is this? And then I come out and people love it, but it's this journey of myself. And if I can take myself on that journey enough and know that and trust the process that I'll get out of it, that's true creativity for me. Is I have to trust myself that like by the deadline, you always find your way out of it. That's what I trust.
I can absolutely relate to that as well. And there's also that trust muscle of knowing like this just isn't the moment. I think as an entrepreneur and business owner, where I struggle is there is still this concept of time and commitment that lives outside of my own creative process. And, and I know that I was going to say prescribe, that's not the right word, but human design is a system that informs some of the ways that you think and operate and certainly exchange with other people. And, you hear a lot as well, especially I think recently in terms of self-leadership and creativity and spirituality. If you're not on, then you just tell everybody, no, that's not going to work. And I struggle with that reality that sometimes you're not on and sometimes you still need to show up. And that's one of the ways that I kind of utilize my own creative process. Is I do believe that I don't think energy is good or bad. It's just there's a particular wavelength or frequency you might be experiencing. Creativity, and the way that I sort of visualize it or experience it, it's much like higher frequency wavelength. That doesn't mean it's better or worse than others. It just serves a completely different purpose. And kind of like what you were talking about in terms of your afternoons or even your mornings, just recognizing how that frequency can show up generally, and then activities that you can do to sort of amplify or fine tune that frequency, I find really useful. But I always wonder, like, is this just my ego and my mind telling me you can do whatever you want, and push through it? Or are there techniques and strategies we have available to us to help kind of optimize, our quote unquote performance or creativity? Or like, are we truly kind of at the whim of these tides, if you will? And they go in and they go out, and recognizing when you have this opportunity to catch this perfect wave, and then also like that set is over and there's going to be some doldrums, and then you just got to kind of wait for that next big wave to crash.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I've oscillated back and forth on this, to be honest, of like, is it just a creative moment and muse that's moving me? And I feel that in, let's say, like big creative endeavors, like when big ideas drop, I feel that. And I also will be very honest and say I have a perfectionist in me. And if I do not have a deadline, I will always alter something and it'll never be good enough. It'll never be complete. So there is a point, and I know when I'm getting close to something more, my internal world is going to create like a fear sensation in me where it's going to start taking me out of my creativity and testing me. And I've done this enough to know that I have to push through that to put deliverables out there. And one of the ways I do that is even my study of how the brain works is your creativity resides only when you're really in your rest and digest system, not in your fear-based responses. So I will put myself purposely into that area, or I'll do relaxation techniques over and over again with my body to be able to access my brain again. Sometimes I'm even throwing myself in the bathtub doing it with magnesium salt. It just depends what that is. Or I'm exercising until I can kind of feel this release. And then I'll go back into the creation. And I can't tell you for sure if the muse is moving or not. It's kind of like you've got a deadline. It will be what it'll be. And I have to learn to trust that, because creative muse, if I just went with the muse, I would never really get things done, I also realize. So I think it's the forces of both that I actually honor and I'm falling in love with more and more. And in another note, which is interesting, is sometimes like my writing right now, I would like to write for other people and I'd love to eventually have a book. But when I'm writing for another person. Like I haven't fallen in love with writing something that I love, and I can do that in my speaking. And that's when I know, like, yeah, I can send this off. I'm in love with this. I haven't done that in my writing. So that's something that I know I'm still going to have to get worked on, because I was like, I'm writing as if I'm sending something to somebody, and my writing I'm not in love with yet. So I know in a creative, when you speak of the muse, it's like my muse hasn't fully enlivened in me to be able to write the way I would like to write.
Do you consider yourself to be an artist?
Yes. Yes.
Did you always? I mean, the accountant lawyer may have had something to say about that.
No.
The accountant especially.
No. And so my opening of my speech is talking about this actually that I'm doing on Wednesday, Nicole, because my brother had this amazing imagination as a child. And we'd have to go out and pick up sticks in our yard, which sounds rare, but we had almost this football field length of a yard with plenty of trees, not quite the woods, enough to mow it. So my parents would have us go out and pick up sticks, myself and my little brother. I would start on one den and I'd be bending over doing the work, picking them up. And my little brother would go and like float through the yard and find this perfect little stick that looked like a sword. And then he's like,
oh, little brothers.
Oh, seriously. So half of me was so mad at my little brother for doing that. I had so much resentment because he wasn't picking up anything. He was just playing. And then the other piece of me is like, how can he spend hours outside playing with sticks in this full on imagination where he's got people around him? He's got this very imaginative space. So when people would ask me, are you creative, or any type of creative conversation, I would always say, no, I lack imagination. My brother has it. So it wasn't like it was a piece for me. But when I became very innovative with my law firm that I owned, that's where I realized I just do creativity different. And now I feel like my creative muse speaks to me the most through speaking. I absolutely love that. I know I can get a ton better. I know I'm pretty good where I'm at too. Like I'm great, but I can tell when I fall in love with something in my speaking. And that's where I feel like more of a creator, is moving the spoken word around and things of that nature. Yeah.
I went through a period there. So I've was caretaking my mother for the last few years. And I was the podcast speaking for me is also very much my art, and something occurs when I really just kind of start letting it flow. It's not quite, I'd like to work on my like delivery and the succinctness. I think I get a little lost in just letting, the channel open. And I'm very proud that I put out a podcast every week for however many years it's been. And despite everything that was kind of going on, I still managed to check that box. But it was very much a box check some days. And I can listen back to it now and think, oh gosh, girl, like you really didn't have it that day. But in the moment, I thought, this is really important. This is my art. This is sort of my own spiritual practice, is really tuning into, I also get to talk to a lot of different people in a lot of different spaces. And it never ceases to amaze me that I have the same conversation. It feels like every week there's this underlying current of energy that everyone's kind of surfing. And that is typically what inspires my episodes. So I look back and I think I'm really glad I did it, but also like was definitely not at 100%. And that's where I kind of wonder, if you had told me at the time, you should not be doing this right now, it's definitely not going to be your best work, I would not have believed you. But I can feel myself in those moments and think, whew, you were probably needing a little bit of a pause or a little bit of a break. I think it would have needed to be extended based on everything that was going on. But I'm always interested in people's creative processes, their routines and their days, especially as entrepreneurs or people who are building multiple different income streams, if we want to call it that. But how you kind of navigate between each of those different spaces and how you maintain energy in a way that it feels like this is my best work. I think most artists or people who would deign to qualify themselves as such are perfectionists. I also think they're procrastinators. I have a couple different episodes where I talk a lot about like procrastination actually being your superpower, because there's something that happens at that 11th hour. I mean, even if you're a parent with kids, like I call it the witching hour, like there's something that happens to us right before we hit the end, and it's pretty magical. And again, I don't know if you can harness it. I think you've probably battled this question a lot as well. Could you prevent someone from hitting burnout? I don't know. It's a pretty sexy place to be, but that there's a frequency there that it feels a little dangerous. It feels a little catalytic. And I think some real magic can happen there when it's contained, but it can also be like the unraveling. So anywho, I'm just jibber jabbering now.
No, and I'm curious to ask you a question actually. And two, like I think it depends on the person too, because I hit burnout where I got really sick. Yeah. And that was a catalyst also for what became the selling of the law firm, excuse me. But so I have to really watch it, because I just know if I hit burnout, my body is going to get very sick. And even I had a human design reading, Nicole, and the guy that did it was this amazing man. And he's mentioned to me, he's like, by the way, if you go over, you're going to go over and you're going to get deeply sick. Do you know that about yourself? And I was like, yes, I can remember back. And I remember these periods of deep sickness. But the question that I have for you is, you just mentioned that I'm fascinated by, and it's how one of the creative lenses I create through is, you said that you speak to people on this podcast over and over again. It seems like there's this reoccurring wave that you see. I'd be interested on, like, what kind of patterns do you see? Would you be willing to answer this on your own podcast? Like, how does it inform who you are and take that information to help you, because you are seeing so many patterns from people?
Thank you. And yeah, absolutely. I love to talk. I love to answer questions. So I have always seen patterns. That's why my art is business. And I worked in the arts for a long time before I swallowed the blue pill and thought, okay, if our superpower is connecting creatives to sustainable livelihoods where they can support themselves, their families, their communities, that's good enough, right? Granted, it wasn't quite as sexy, but I can like remember the exact moment sitting at a computer in a recording studio and wanting to be the producer in the room, but just recognizing that this is my art. And it was in seeing that pattern. Where do people always come to me, or why do people always come to me? Where are they coming to me? Why? What are we always talking about? I was kind of able to recognize that pattern. And so now it's because I mentor people, I coach people. I've just started consulting again, and so I find myself in people's businesses. I find myself talking to leaders. I find myself talking to people who want to start something, and they're in all different parts of the world. And usually it's in towards the end of the week I kind of reflect on. I take really copious notes. That helps me focus. It's funny, everybody wants to do things on camera now. I find camera to be wildly distracting. I don't really even watch stuff like TV. So I take notes. That helps me focus, but things just kind of jump out at me and I realize, oh, I was talking about, I actually send a newsletter out at the end of every week that I call the loop. And it's because it seems like there's a loop every week that we're all kind of chewing on, if you will. And I don't know, I guess I just kind of noticed that through my note taking, through my own writing, through my own reflection and meditation practices, and then through kind of the ideas pop into my head. I get like one sentence. And so I find myself like using my phone and texting myself or capturing voice memos if I'm driving. Or I always have kind of a notebook and that I'll just hear it like, oh, we've been talking about how fear feels like I have to. And that limits you to a binary choice. I call that the binary space. And it's an either or. And the thing is this is always a multiple choice quiz. And so if you're in the binary, don't ever take action or try and make a decision because you've just limited yourself. And that's how fear impacts your own ability to create or lead or systemize or connect. So that's just not the space for it. So I don't know if that answers your question, but that's kind of how it shows up for me.
Yeah. And one of the reasons I asked is in my law firm, I did a weekly podcast as well. And it was like the gathering of data of what people said over and over and over again. I just called people in the industry over and over again that I chose topics to speak on. And a lot of times it was topics that I had to weave into a broader topic like business strategies for the conference to pick it up. And then I would almost have to go back and forth. And they're like, yeah, but it's not the individual stuff that we have to focus on. We're trying to get the board level. And I'd be like, no, but the individual stuff is what's crushing the organizations, is because they don't know how to do this and they don't know what to look at. So it's always like this watching of patterns and then taking them from the podcast I was hosting up into my speaking and being able to speak through that lens of like, here's the unique patterns Jennifer is seeing, or like how I'm seeing. I have no idea why I just refer to myself in a third person right there, but that's how I like to speak, is like I just monitor a lot of patterns for people and then I go back up and that's how I create things. It's like, what are the patterns that I've been noticing quite a bit? So I was interested to hear that from you.
Because it also shows up like synchronicities. So as an example, I was just listening to a podcast because sometimes I'll put that on in the background. And one of the podcasts I've been listening to for 15 years is Tim Ferriss's. And he had Brene Brown on years ago. And now he's doing kind of summaries. And she was talking about when she goes into an organization, she's not a coach, she's not a therapist, she's a researcher. And so she's literally going in to look at systems and patterns. And she was saying how there's always this one naysayer on the team. And they're usually asking for her to justify her expenses and to put together a business case study for why she should be there. And I'm currently experiencing that right now with one of my clients. And so I'm just like, oh, weird. Like, I wasn't planning on listening to this podcast. I listened to it once upon a time before. So that's another reason that it's very random that I would be listening to that. Now you and I are talking about patterns, my senses this week is there's probably going to be some naysayer on a team that I'm actually coaching my clients on. and then I'll talk about it in the loop this Friday. So I've started to really kind of notice and tune into, what if it's not a coincidence? What if this is all happening because there is a larger pattern at play here? And just allowing that to be kind of a creative prompt that I can noodle on throughout, kind of percolating in the background while I'm kind of just moving about my day to day. So yeah, it kind of gamifies life for me and makes me have a little bit more fun with what can often be like really mundane or really challenging situations.
No, I completely agree, because I think it's always interesting how something will all of a sudden come through and it'll be like the direct inspiration for me to finish a project. And I was like, yep, that's a through line. Like, that completes this, hearing that from here, reading this there. So it's really fascinating.
Yeah. And to kind of go back to what I was talking about before, like, it can be really counterintuitive because you have a deadline and it's tomorrow, or you told somebody you'd get something done today. And it's for me, I am the opposite of a perfectionist. I've actually had to kind of try to raise my bar. I think it's from having worked with artists for 20 years and I saw what that did. So I've always just been a done is better than perfect. And it could probably use another pass. Like, the amount of typos that get through my lens is a thing. So it's like that feeling of this is it and it's good enough is something I've had to really tune into to actually push myself to take it one step further. I think for a lot of artists and entrepreneurs and creatives, there's probably something there in recognizing this is enough. And sure, we could give it another go. But I had that feeling, like that through line or that moment of connection that allowed me to see we got here. And there is a moment of pause before going, do we really need to take that extra step, or could we send it? But that also, you touched on something, and I think it's really, really important, especially in our line of work. I do believe we are all wired differently. And I don't think what works for me is necessarily what's going to work for you or for somebody else. And I think this style of leadership or even business has presented like there is one right way, or there is a model or a system. And if you just follow this, you will get to where you want to go. And I don't want to say that that's not true, but I do think individually and for each person listening, there is a huge amount of value in hearing what people like Jen or myself have to say, but really then taking that information and applying it to yourself and seeing, how does this really feel for me? Does this feel like there's a through line here? There's a pattern here, that this is something fun that I'm playing with? Or does this feel uncomfortable and challenging, and not in a way? I've recently been describing that feeling almost like sand in the bed. Like, it's not a huge problem. I'm probably going to be able to like ignore this if I try really hard, or if I take 3 seconds to just address this, we're good here. But it's kind of recognizing in yourself what feels worthwhile in terms of playing with it or taking it one step further, or what feels like it's getting gritty and not in a challenging, like strengthening way.
Hey, do you have an example of where you've been dealing with this recently? I'm just curious.
Gosh, it feels sometimes last week, I don't know about you, but last week for me was very like sand in the bed crunchy. And so working within a client's office, and there is one person that is not thrilled that I'm there. There's some really big projects that we're working on, and we don't have the necessary details to get really predictive with it, because we've got to cross certain thresholds before we can hit the green light on the next round of projects. So as example, fundraising, right? Can't really hit the second leg of the project until we finish the fundraising for the first leg. But we don't know when we're going to finish it, because that's based on a certain amount of money, not a date. And people were getting really stressed out about it, and it was getting personal. And so it's recognizing this isn't me. That's that like sand in the bed feeling. This is just a frequency that is stress. And
Mm-hmm.
people are telling themselves stories about the situation, or potentially they're telling themselves a story about me, but it's not, I am not the the villain in their narrative. I'm just like to play the video game analogy through like a non-playable character that's just kind of like in their video game that they can either maneuver around or, tap on me to get some type of a message for what they can do next. But it's that experience of there's something bigger at play here and I am a part of it, but I can't control it. And so
Mm-hmm.
by
Mm-hmm.
recognizing that I can flow with this and figure out where we're going to land rather than like try and resist it and hold back all of that water and kind of use all of my energy and focus on fighting something that's happening rather than just going with it and not making a big thing about it. That I'm speaking in like very esoteric terms because it's happening in real time.
Yes, 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 yes. And I find this actually really fascinating because a lot of what I talk about with creativity in groups is the personal factor of creativity and how it, my dog and her cone just came in the background.
Yep.
And
What's up?
hopefully that's not, yeah, picked up too much. But it's this philosophy that creativity is something that's so incredibly personal for each of us because it's coming
Mm-hmm.
from our own unique viewpoints and perspectives. And then when we share it in a room, we immediately bump up against our defensive mechanisms and our unique way of taking it personally when other people don't agree or there's stress involved just inherent in the process, and we'll see the creativity go out the door, and then we'll see this other, I want to say, aspect come in, and that's usually the stress response. And this is where I talk a lot about like it's essentially a default mode network and your brain gets hijacked, and then they start making storylines that are based out of fear. And it's really interesting to watch, and a lot of people, I will work with them to be like, let's start creating a practice of watching what those are, because some people will put it on themselves, some people will project it like you said, like you're the little video game avatar, and other people might even do it much bigger than that and they'll blame it on like God or something, some higher thing. And it's interesting to watch that, because I was like, if that's involved in a room, a lot of times I'll like to be like, hey, we're in it right now, so I'm going to first try to do an elevation technique. But it's fascinating because that is such a pattern. It's a pattern around creativity that not only we personally have, but a lot of the work I do is like coming in and saying, this is going on. And I start calling those things out in rooms because it goes unknown. Like people just don't realize how powerful it is and why it's happening and how their own projections are happening around it. And I was like, it's part of the process, but I want to make sure we don't take each other out through it. Yeah. So it's just,
Yeah.
isn't it interesting?
It's fascinating. And I think what I've appreciated, firstly, about getting to work with artists forever, but then about understanding, I believe we are all artists and our work, which I'm going to ask you about, but it is our art, but it becomes so much more vulnerable when we phrase it like that, because a creative endeavor feels a lot different than just showing up to, I mean, for some people, waiting tables is absolutely going to be a creative endeavor. But if you're just going there, you're taking orders, you're throwing food on the table, it feels very outside of yourself. It's going to be a different engagement with your work than an artist who is creating something that feels like it's a part of themselves that they are now offering to the collective, because not everybody's going to like it. That's the whole point of art. Some people are going to love it. Some people are going to hate it. And that's really scary. And I think as you kind of move up through your career and move into your commitment to your work and do see it as a part of yourself that you are then giving to others, it can become very easy, like you said, to let these external influences keep you from making your art or keep you from loving your art. And when we understand why we're doing it and what our kind of superpower is, I think it becomes easier to stand strong in that offering and recognize, like, if you don't like, I was going to think of a waiting tables analogy. If you don't like hamburgers and I serve you a hamburger, you don't hate me, you hate the dish that I just put in front of you. And it is a different feeling than if someone truly is rejecting you for who you are. And at work, and that's one of the reasons that I love business coaching and now executive coaching is we don't get those same kind of personal, like, well, I just don't like hamburgers. It's like, we have to create the whole restaurant's menu here, regardless of if you like it or not. So how are we going to work with each other and respect each other and respect each other's values and tastes and desires and co-create something that everybody can actually be really proud of, regardless of if they like it or not? I find that like interaction really interesting. And I think for me, making it creative work has helped me understand everybody's different. Everyone's going to have different tastes. We are all wired differently. So what works for, Juan ain't going to work for Shannon. And even like what worked last year probably isn't going to work right now. And so it's this kind of constant state of evolution, which I think is catalyzed through challenge. And when we choose creativity, that feels like a more fun way for me to play with this kind of problem solving than this binary fear based. There's metrics and all of this data informs what happens rather than, sure, I think that information is really useful, but we can also create a really interesting story around that data and then play with the outcomes.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I wanted to ask you, what do you think your air quotes work is?
That is fascinating. So I actually look for habitual structures. And what I mean by that is I have this fascinating ability to go in and be able to see in a system. A lot of times it's the human systems of like, if you sit people around the room, who's the one that everyone is looking to lead, and how, when that is happening, it actually does not allow the others to be creative. So then I inherently know, like, if you pull this energy back, like I teach the leader to pull back their energy, the rest of the people will actually stand up and feel more empowered. So I like to play with the energy between people in dynamics in business structures, because I don't deal with people that are actually doing the classic art. Mine is really looking at an example would be, I had one individual that I worked with where he was exceptional at processes. And after the meeting that a leader was not him, somebody over him, a leader over him, kept leading these weekly meetings saying, these are all the initiatives that just came down that we have to put in place. He was very frustrated because at the end of the meeting, everyone knew the initiatives. No one was assigned initiative. So nothing actually got done before the next week. There was just a whole bunch of initiatives, but there was no program or plan in place for who's doing what. So it created a lot of chaos. And he just kept being frustrated by that. And then I find out that he had once taken a burrito recipe, like a burrito he tasted out in the world, and dissected it and kept trying every single ingredient in the burrito until he perfected it. And it tasted exactly like the restaurant burrito. And I was like, oh, do you love processes? And he's like, yes, I absolutely adore figuring out processes to the point where it's perfection, essentially, for other people. And I was like, that's why that meeting is frustrating you so much, because you see all the flaws in the process. Will you go back in? And he's like, but it's not my meeting that I'm running. And then I work on, let's actually empower you to see that why you should be going and talking to the leader to take this off his plate, because this is your gift, not that leader's gift. And you guys should be working together. So I do a lot of communication structures, and then just watching for patterns of like, this is your gift in a world that doesn't have the hardcore artwork, right? Like the physical artwork. I'm watching for those kind of patterns and the gifts, and I put those in place in workplaces and within people. And I look for it that way so people can be more innovative and work together better, essentially.
I love that. I think we often underestimate our own superpowers because they come so naturally to us.
100%. A lot of people don't realize they're their superpowers at all. And without having enough confidence in them, they don't speak up with them. And then that's where our workplaces don't have the inherent gifts that are there because people don't know that they're inherent gifts. So it requires us as creatives to be around a table and honoring that and getting feedback from everyone, because it's almost like I'm facing you. My creativity I may see, but I've got a whole blind spot behind me that I can't see. And that's where other people and learning communication structures to be supportive and not personal can really help benefit and make people a lot stronger, because we require other people to help emphasize our gifts and to help other people be better. So our information is our information in our organizations are just at a higher calibration.
Is that how speaking and your work with clients kind of intersect the process of communication?
Yes. So a lot of my speaking is informing them and making them understand where I see these different communication structures breaking down. It's a lot of awareness that I'm building through my speaking. So then people can kind of do this. I always say I'm an insight giver, where people I want to walk away and go, oh, I never looked at it that way. That makes so much sense. And I had no idea that was happening underneath the surface. That's what I love to do in my speaking. So then they can reorient and realize we should be looking at things differently.
Beautiful. Well, I feel like we're getting to the time that it would make sense if people did want to find you, listen to you, work with you. How might they do that? Is there a better person for that? I'll kind of let you take it from here in terms of how you want to direct people towards your magic.
Yes, yes. The best place to find me is my website, jennifergermaine.com. Germaine's Germaine. So that's the best place to check in, and there'll be different links on what I'm doing and what I'm up to there.
Beautiful. Do you have any workshops or anything coming up?
I'm going to be offering a few for speakers or people that would like to have more mastery in the spoken word in regards to organizations and creativity and what that looks like. So those will be coming up. We just don't have them populated on the agenda, like on the website yet. But those will be released very soon.
Beautiful. I know you do have an awesome newsletter that people can sign up for as well. And so that might be the best way to actually stay in touch and know what's going on with you.
That's correct. Thanks for calling that out, Nicole. I appreciate that.
Oh, no worries. Well, I always feel like people, the whole point of these is to have conversations to help, I think, like you said, help people see them a little bit of themselves in our conversations and just to really normalize the entrepreneur experience, especially from a creative lens, and to help people understand everybody is going to have their own way to discover and build and replicate their own success. And there might be people on that journey that could help them, guide them, offer them a specific learning, or even just have a conversation that is inspiring and helps people see perhaps the challenge they're experiencing in a slightly different way.
Yeah, I completely agree.
So thank you again, especially for making time before another big speech tomorrow. Where are you traveling to?
Iowa, actually.
Ooh. I'm not going to say anything about Iowa. I don't really have the I state. So I'm always like, wait, Indiana, where is that?
Yeah, that's okay.
Like a true coastal.
Yeah.
Well, have so much fun on your travels. I'm a little bit jealous of everyone that's going to get to hear you speak, but I look forward to the next time I will get to participate in that endeavor. So again, thank you so much. I appreciate you. I appreciate all of the work that you do in the world. Thank you for being in service, and I look forward to our paths crossing again.
Thank you, Nicole. This has been fun.
Good. And thank you for weathering my tech storms on this as well. Lord, it got hairy.